Before this video starts, I'd just like to make an announcement. I have the Liberal Tears mug for $14.99 on my website. It is the first link in the description if you want to go pick one up. Don't worry if it breaks when it comes to your house. I'll send you another one for free out of my pocket. I don't care. I want you to get your Liberal Tear mug. It comes in Liberal Tears white with the face, black with the face, white without the face, and black without the face. So pick whichever one you want, and it'll come to your door in about 3 to 5 days. So that should be epic. First link in the description. Thank you. Let's go on with the video.
Bristol, and I guess that goes to the heart of it, Sean. At what point do you think children are able to make up their own mind on something like this?
Well, I think the whole point about this kind of treatment or realization is actually a lot of it. There's a lot of nonsense in the media at the moment about transgender children and about the kind of treatments that they go through. I mean, something like puberty blockers, for example, which was just discussed there in the clip, are in fact about delaying puberty and allowing children space and time when they've experienced such strong distress in early childhood at their gender role, to actually give them the time before a puberty, which they didn't ask for and they're struggling with already, takes over and essentially takes a lot of decisions out of their hand that have to be reversed painfully later.
Let me just bring in Ray Blanchard, who's just joining us now from Toronto. Good to have you, Ray. Ray's spent many years researching the factors that determine the development of sexual orientation. And would you go along with that, Ray? Say, actually, if you can take out that messy, awkward, complicated stage of puberty because a small child knows best already, wouldn't you choose to do that?
Well, in the first place, there's a few facts that have to be introduced here for background. Number one, every follow-up study has shown that the majority of children with gender identity issues do not end up transsexual. The majority end up with normal gender identity. Secondly, we have no diagnostic procedure or method that can reliably distinguish which children are going to go in a transsexual trajectory and which ones are going to end up with normal gender identity, even without intervention. And thirdly, I think people who are not enthusiastic about gender transition in very young children take the position that the first line of approach clinically should be helping the child accept his or her sex. If they can't do that, then by puberty, it's reasonable to consider puberty blockers. And so Sean, I'm okay with puberty blockers.
Sean, we heard
but only after a screening period.
Let me just bring in Sean again. We heard about a doctor who was fired in Canada for not being gender affirmative enough. In other words, for asking children to pause before making that kind of gender choice. Surely it's right for the medical profession to try and stop that in the first instance because it's irreversible.
Well, one thing I want to say is that actually the doctor in question wasn't fired purely because of his, ideology about children and gender. He was also fired because of a review by his peers, which actually found that his methodology was faulty, but also that his practice as a clinician was abusive. He was photographing children in various states of undress, and his peers couldn't find out any reason why. He was asking them very lurid sexual questions. And, I mean, I have to say
Sean,
that we have to be a little bit wary, Emily, of...
categorically untrue.
Okay,
and really, this needs to be stopped.
OK, we've heard from Ray that's categorically untrue. I don't want to go further down these allegations because he's not here to defend himself. But let us look at the wider question, which is essentially that this is something that cannot be reversed for a child. Isn't it eminently sensible in such a young science for clinical practitioners to pause?
Well, unfortunately,
Absolutely.
I mean, the problem is that when that pause occurs, it sounds very nice and it sounds very reasonable and rational. But these are real people at the heart of it. And unfortunately, one statistic that genuinely is true in this country is that 48% of trans teenagers, before they hit 18, attempt suicide. Let's not think about it, that's attempt.
Gosh.
And what you're condemning to, when you call for this very reasonable pause, is for people who know, and their parents increasingly know, and their teachers increasingly know, and the majority of clinicians know. You're asking them to go through a process that's going to increase their mental distress.
Ray Blanchard, sorry, bring in.
The objective data show that the rates of suicidal ideation and gestures in gender dysphoric children are the same as the rates of those gestures and ideation in other psychiatric populations of children and adolescents. And furthermore, there is no data that the rate of completed suicides is higher in gender dysphoria children and adolescents.
If we just break this down, though, Ray, isn't the question that parents do not want to feel that they are guilty of having failed to listen to their child's concerns when they could have done something meaningful about it?
Yes, I agree. Some parents are being emotionally blackmailed by false information about threats of suicide by gender dysphoric children into thinking that if they make any attempt to help their kid accept their anatomic sex, that they are putting their child at risk of suicide.
Okay.
And it's just pure manipulation
Sean,
by trans activists.
It's manipulation and it's emotionally blackmailing.
I have to ask, who is manipulating? Where is this coming from? I mean, I certainly, I'm transgender myself. I work with a lot of transgender children in the work that I do. No one's parents were looking for this or expected it. It was something new for them too. Most parents of transgender children have had to go through a long process. It's not like your GP pushes it. It's not, it's quite difficult, in fact, to access healthcare in this country. Schools aren't very aware of it. It's this idea that there is some kind of pressure or some trans mob that walks into a home and says, your child's playing with dolls, it's time for surgery. That doesn't happen. It is the child themselves that drives it. And
just
people realise because they want to rescue
We've run out of time. A last word to you, Ray. Do you think it's just
getting the message?
A last word to you, Ray.
Yes?
Do you think it's just because, essentially, this is a very new science, people haven't caught up with where transgender issues are, even those who work within it? Briefly.
I think the problem is that the media coverage, and I'm not talking about the BBC here, but media coverage has been so overwhelmingly one-sided in terms of cheerleading for gender transition and has not covered other aspects of the question.
Is the president right to use that word?
I don't think so. I will tell you that I was surprised, I was shocked, I was disappointed. I think language matters, especially when that language is coming from the leader of the free world, the President of the United States, especially as an African-American man. I think what it does, quite frankly, Wolf, is give people the feeling that they too can use it. We hear that argument being made oftentimes, well, rappers use it, so I can use it too. And I think that the president was sort of ill-advised in thinking that he was either going to be provocative or be instructive and nuanced, because we all know he's a wordsmith. We know that he chooses his words carefully. So I don't think this was an accidental use of the term, but it now opens up the field for others using it. And in fact, on our very network, Wolf, you know that this term was not used. It wasn't something that journalists could use, and it wasn't something that we aired on our network. But now, because the president said it, I have heard that word, a very hurtful word, over and over and over again.
Not right.
Just today. It is right.
That's
it
not
is right.
No, I disagree with you. We have been able to use that word on this network for the entire 9 years that I've been here.
We haven't done it.
Yes, we have. I've used it. I've done it the entire time that I've been here. And the guidance has been, if the anchor is comfortable saying the word, the anchor can say the word on this network. That has been the guidance.
Don, we had a correspondent a couple of years ago, and I've been here for 6, 7 years.
Said
and that correspondent was not was reprimanded for using that term.
No, she was not. She was reprimanded for using an expletive, not for using that word.
That's even worse, Don, because that means that using an expletive is worse than using a racial epithet.
But it's not. She was using the no. If she was on television calling someone that word, then yes, she should be suspended for it. But if she's on television using that word in context as to what someone said or what was used in a court of law or what have you, then no one should be suspended for that. We should not sanitize that word by saying this person called such and such the N-word. No, that person didn't call that person the N-word. That person called Sonny. I know you're going to get upset. That person called you or that person a nigger. They didn't say the N-word.
I can't believe,
journalists,
Don, that you, as an African-American man, is going to use that word just so flippantly.
Because
words
we're
matter,
using
and you should know that.
I do know that. I have said the entire time that I've been here, I don't think we should bastardize a word. I don't think it should be used freely in songs over and over again.
We shouldn't use it at all.
If you're using it in context of a story and it is relevant, you should be able to say it. In fact, I encourage people to say it because I think you should hear the
encouraging people to use a racial
because you should hear
epithet.
the impact of the word. No, I'm not encouraging people to call people the N-word. I'm using it historically. If I'm a journalists are part of the record. It is our job to convey the truth and to tell people reality.
It is
it's not
our
our job
to
it's not our
realize
job
that there
to
are certain words that
sanitize a
should
word.
not be used. It is
It
also
shouldn't be
our
used
job
if you're calling
to use
someone.
our conscience,
if you're
to use our
using-
journalistic conscience,
Yes,
to make
that's-
sure
and
that
that's
we
what-
do
that's
not
what we're
use words
doing.
that are offensive.
Don,
It's
Don, I
like you
just
wouldn't get on
it's
air and use
offensive if
expletives.
you're using it to call someone a derogatory name,
But Don,
not
let me,
if you're reporting a story.
False dichotomy here between Britishness and Englishness. They're not
There's
at
an
all.
absolute dichotomy. The two are completely different. There is a historic English identity which goes way back before the concept of Britain. Also, this notion of England, or indeed Britain, as uniquely a nation of immigrants is preposterous. That every European country is a blend. Of course it is. There are two great differences.
I believe you have a house in America, Mr. Stuckey.
I have a
Professor
house in
Stuckey.
America.
I was wondering, where are you domiciled for tax purposes?
I am
Here.
domiciled here and I pay full taxes. And can I just say, as you have chosen to be personal and invidious, let me share a little story with you. One of the great things that is essential to Britishness is a sense of public duty, that you do things for nothing with organisations that can't pay. Ms. Penny, who has been advertising these great left-wing virtues, and I were due to debate for a very impoverished little society called the Thomas Paine Society on the virtues of a republic on the one hand and a monarchy on the other. I was prepared to do it for free. She insisted on trying to charge such a large fee that the event had to be cancelled. Now, I think that is as mean and grasping as some runt comedian, and I will not be lectured to by a jumped-up public school girl like you. I came from the bottom, and I will not have it.
Excuse me. May I respond to that?
Right of reply. Go on.
I think I deserve a right of reply to that. I personally feel that asking to be paid...
Did you or did you not do what I've just said?
I was going to respond to that, but...
Why not do it straight away? Did you or did you not claim such a large fee that the event had to be cancelled?
No, I didn't, Mr.
Well,
Stuckey.
then every member of the committee is lying, and you, clearly as usual, are telling the truth.
No, this is not what was said to me. I
have emails.
All right,
That
all right.
wonderful method of
respond
tracking.
to it, Laurie.
No, I don't think I'm going to respond to it. One of the reasons the event was cancelled partly because they couldn't find a speaker in time because they were trying to fly me out, and part of the reason that the cost for that on top of my being asked to be paid for 2 days' work because I actually don't earn very much.
Well, they had two pretty good speakers there already.
Well,
No, she backed out because she wasn't being paid.
Anyway,
I'm sorry. Excuse me.
we're running over time, but I want to come back to
I
this point about-
really don't appreciate being stood on stage to
Yeah.
be personally
okay.
attacked and having a finger
I want
jabbed
to
in
come
my
back
face.
to Englishness versus Britishness, but Vivian?
Yeah, I don't know if you can hear me, but I think the point about...
Laurie?
I think I'd like to say something about Britishness in terms of what's just gone on here, which I feel like we've been moving on very quickly from. But I attempted to make a point and had a person on this panel shouting and pointing in my face. And in fact, the point that Professor Starkey raised about my dropping out of a panel where we were due to speak together, my main reason for doing so is that I didn't want something like that to happen. I felt that I was being set up to be attacked, and part of the reason I decided to... This is a difficult thing to say, and it's easier to say to event organisers that you're going to charge a ridiculous sum of money and be asked, and well, not necessarily ridiculous, but be asked to go.
Right.
On the other. Excuse me. I haven't finished my point. My point is that this is what debates like this come down to. There's a civil way putting putting racial prejudice. There is also I'm sorry.
Okay, Laurie. I want a final word.
I wanted to say that there's a violence inherent in this discussion, and it comes out very, very easily.
You started it.
Why is it that Muslims seem to come to Christian countries if people want to practice Islam? If people are so fond of the Islamic tradition, for example, why not stay in countries where Islam is the religion? Why is it, Jeff, that Muslims choose to come to Christian countries? Because that seems to me the tension between the cross and the crescent, to use Erdogan's words, seems to me to be increased because Turks seem to want to live in Christian lands. Can you help me?
Of course. After the Second World War, the ruined Europe needed labor. And what they did, they come to Turkey, they said, guys, we need your help to build our country. And they have taken millions of Turks from Turkey to work in Europe. This is happening after the Second World War. I'm talking about 1940s and 50s.
Yes.
Turkish people didn't go to Europe yesterday. They were there for years. Now the third generation is living in Germany. They are more German or they are more Dutch than the normal Dutch person. I've been to Amsterdam. I've got relatives in Amsterdam. They are really not religious minded. They can do headscarf. It doesn't mean they are extremists. They are just living under religion. I mean, the Sikh people is wearing turban. It doesn't mean he's extremist. It's just the way they traditionally represent themselves. The Jewish people can wear kippahs on their head. It doesn't mean they are extremists. We should allow that until if they are always extremely citing terrorism and then alleged acid attacks on their face, it's just unbelievable. Turkish people, you can't find any Turkish people, I don't know, named with the terrorist attack in Paris, in Germany, no way. This is not in our culture. We are, I don't know, maybe we can't represent ourselves in the right way.
Yeah, I hear you. Jeff, there's a lot of people, and I'm just trying to articulate some of the voices that we have here on text and Twitter. Jeff the Turk, he's not speaking sense. I've translated that into a more polite form there. When he says violence isn't in their culture, tell that to Handi Khan and many other non-conformists in Turkey who've been met with vile acts of violence. Someone else trying to point out that it was a Turk who shot the Pope. That seems to be a little bit harsh. But some people saying, why is it if Turkish people want to be true to Turkey, why would you not live in Turkey?
Well, I mean, this is just absurd. I mean,
yeah, I'm just putting some voices to. Yeah, I'm just. Because
I'm working in financial services.
Of course,
probably I'm paying much more tax than these people are saying. I mean, this is just crazy remarks to make. If that's the case, then Scottish people should be having a referendum and then be independent. You can't just say that. You know.
Well, they are asking for that.
Well, they're not going to get it because...
Yeah, but they are asking for that.
Well, Jeff. They can ask, but they're not going to get it. They have to stay. She should just shut up and get on with her work rather than trying to seek independence. This is what she should do.
So Nick, sorry, just from your perspective as someone who's Turkish, Nicola Sturgeon should shut up.
Exactly. She should just shut up and get on with her work. She should just help Scottish people to get more rich, more jobs or infrastructure or health and education. It is not her job to determine every 2 years to have referendum if you don't like the result.
And I suppose the only thing I don't have an answer to, Jeff, is that delicate question I was trying to ask, which is why is it people from that choose Islam? If Islam is so great, why come to live in Christian countries? And I accepted your point about work after the war, but I mean now, why the urge for migrants? Erdogan saying, well, look, I'll send you 15,000 a week, like migrants are a threat now, which is a bit odd. Why do migrants seek to come to Christian countries, Jeff?
Well, for example, I'm a Muslim person. I came to this country 17 years ago.
Yeah, I'm talking about recent arrivals, Jeff. Recent arrivals, not you.
Well, I mean, probably going for work. But
I've got 30 seconds, Jeff. Why do Muslims now, recently, in the last year, 2 years, 3 years, if Islam is so great, why come to Christian countries?
Just to make it clear.
No, I've got 30 seconds, Jeff.
Or the other
I don't discriminate, Jeff. I don't discriminate.
Well, because of the problems in the Middle East.
But if there's problems in Middle East, is it not because of religion? Jeff, I'm so annoyed I've got to go because of time. Jeff, thank you for your call. Thank you.
So currently in the U.S., a woman makes on average 79 cents for every dollar the man makes. Now that's the average. That's the average.
It's not even the average.
See, the interesting thing is that pay is close to equal right after you graduate from college among college-educated men and women. That gap widens when men and women hit their mid-30s, which is when people start having kids. So how should we think about this wage gap? Should we put it down to personal choices, or does sex discrimination play a role? Let's give it to you, Julie.
Well, it doesn't surprise me. Good. It doesn't surprise me to hear a lesbian skeptical about family values. Since after their relationships start, you know, lesbian bed death sets in, you know, there's barely, I mean, look, what you have to understand about the wage gap is that it doesn't, first of all, it doesn't exist. It's based on a misunderstanding between wages and earnings. These are two different words in the dictionary. If you want to look something up, look that up. If you take all of the money that women earn and all of the money that men earn and you do a simple division, yes, you will find that the numbers are different. And that's because women make different life choices. If, however, you start to drill down to pay, you discover that if there is a wage gap at all, it is in favor not of men, but of women under the age of 30, at least in America. You also discover that when you control for women's different life choices, for instance, women tend not to graduate in engineering, and nobody is holding them back from applying for computer science or engineering or physics or any of those subjects. If you believe that there is a patriarchal conspiracy to keep women out of those subjects, you have to explain why there isn't one in veterinary science and biology, where women dominate. You discover that women make different life choices, and sometimes there are uncomfortable and unpopular truths that you have to factor in as an economist to the staff. Women don't work as hard. Now, that's an unpopular thing to say, but they don't work the same hours as men. They take longer holidays, whether or not they've had babies. And, of course, they have children. And I, you know, as a compassionate person, don't mind building in some things into the tax system and into the way the government works to accommodate that and to reward women for doing, you know, for performing the essential function of our species. But that doesn't mean that private sector employers should pay them when they're not working. Now, to address the point very specifically, you cannot pay a woman and a man differently for doing the same job. That's against the law, and it doesn't happen. There are some cases in which women don't put in the hours it takes to make partner. And when you get to those higher professions, which Julie says she doesn't care about, but she will invoke to win an argument, when you get to those higher levels of employment, sometimes women just don't want to do the 80-hour weeks that men do. Now, part of that is probably biologically rooted. Julie doesn't like biological arguments, but there is very clear evidence that, very clear, I mean, from the evidence of our bodies, but also brain science, that men and women are different in quite significant cognitive ways. But there's also evidence that even in the most enlightened and equal societies, women stubbornly refuse to make the choices that feminists would like them to. For instance, if you look into emerging economies, you discover that the split between men and women in subjects that lead to very high-paying jobs, whether it's physics or computer science or maths, it's pretty equal in many cases, because those women don't have much of a choice but to just do it, get on with it, and make a living. When you look at societies that are famed for their feminist credentials, that are the most equal places in the world, Sweden, Norway, the West generally, frankly, you discover that a gap opens up and women stop choosing to do certain subjects when they have the full range of options available to them. And what you discover is something counterintuitive, and it's that when women are more free to make decisions, when women have more options available to them, more money, and better access to the institutions, to education, to the workplace, women just won't make the choices feminists would like them to. And they don't make those choices because, yeah, unlike radical lesbian feminists, some women want a family and children.
On one hand, they say there's no genders. On one hand, there's 58 genders. There's always going to be a wage gap. There's 58 genders. How can there be wage gap when gender is a social construct?
The government has been accused of not doing enough to bring in reforms aimed at eliminating the gender pay gap. Concerns were raised by the cross-party Women's and Equalities Committee that ministers were not effectively tackling the causes of the difference in pay between men and women. Well, to discuss this, we're joined by Anne Frank, Chief Executive of the Chartered Management Institute, and the Management and Leading Training Organisation, and by Narissa Chesterfield, the Communications Officer at the free market think tank, the Institute of Economic Affairs. Anne, to you first, how is the gender pay gap measured?
Well, the best way of measuring it is to measure what men are paid versus women at various levels of work. So if you do it by pay quartile, what you see is down at the bottom in the more junior roles, there's more pay equality between men and women. But as you move up the ranks, there are fewer men than women and fewer women than men, and they are paid considerably less, up to 30% less in senior roles.
Narissa, the Institute for Fiscal Studies say that women earn 18% less than men on average, largely because they're missing out on pay rises or promotion if they do take time out to have children. Why do you think it's a myth?
Well, I don't think it's a myth if we call it not a gender pay gap, but a motherhood pay gap. Certainly the pay gap, which is actually at 9%, not at the 18% that is the so-called official pay gap. But this comes because it comes when women take time out of work to have children. So women over the age of 40 might be earning less. But actually the IFS said in the report themselves that that was because they were taking, perhaps going back in, not into full-time work, but into part-time work. So they're working less hours. And that can partly explain that pay gap.
Is that taken into account, Anne? Is it, you know, if a woman is working fewer hours, it makes sense that she's paid less than a male colleague, doesn't it?
Well, it does, but in the study we do, which looks at managerial pay, we actually measure what men and female managers are paid, and that's where we equal it out. So we do full-time equivalent to take account of part-time work, and that study shows that at the top of organizations, women are earning up to 30% less than men for the same work, and their bonuses are half the size of men's. And the root cause of that is that men are 40% more likely than women to get promoted.
Narissa?
Well, in many ways, you have to take the point that women who come out of work and they will obviously, their career trajectory is interrupted, as with men, if they take time out of work and their career trajectory is interrupted, they will have to take a pay cut when they come back into the working world. But I think what we have to do is,
it's not a pay cut just to have a child. If you're out for 6 months on maternity leave, you should come back on exactly the same terms as you left. You shouldn't be taking a pay cut when you come back.
Well, I don't think if it's that amount of time, if it's 6 months paid maternity leave, they don't take a pay cut. That's not true at all. It's more if they take longer time out of work for childcare and for familial reasons. And ditto with men, if they take time out of work for a better work-life balance, they will see their career trajectory shortened and their opportunities shortened and their pay cut. But women, essentially, they have the choice, and it's all about, that's the point of this. This is about individual choice.
I think it's a little bit more than that. I think that what employers need to do with talented women who take time off for children, which obviously does happen, is not jump to the conclusion that when they return to work, they're no longer interested in having a meaningful and challenging career. So we encourage employers to have career conversations with returning women and ask them about their aspirations and not just assume that they are no longer ambitious. And we know that employers that do this and offer flexible solutions, which of course the government is advocating, do better in the workplace. They have happier, more engaged cultures and better business performance.
Absolutely, but that flexible working option is already there in place. We have the right to ask our employers for flexible working hours. We also have shared parental leave, which actually provides a huge amount of flexibility. And where that has been implemented most generously in Sweden, back in the 1970s, it found that in the 1990s only 6% of men were actually taking that up, which proves that perhaps women actually want to stay at home and they choose to stay at home and more.
Or perhaps it chooses that the men are perhaps paid more and it makes more economic sense for the family, for the person that earns the least, to be taking the time out.
Well, not necessarily.
Well, I actually think...
Sorry, that was to Narissa, Anne, sorry.
Not necessarily at all. It's actually more of a societal thing, I think, in that case, because I think society hasn't quite adjusted to the idea of men taking time out of work for parental leave rather than the women. And there's no evidence to suggest that up until the age of between the ages of 22 to 39, in this country, women are actually, on average, earning slightly more than men. So I don't think that's an issue at all.
Is it society's fault, Anne?
Well,
Sorry?
I think the statistics that Marissa is citing, unfortunately, were the same 10 years ago. So the idea that this is a generational thing and it will resolve itself generationally just doesn't wash. So what we do need to do is have targeted interventions that encourage companies to look at their own glass pyramids and understand the reasons why women aren't advancing, and to do something about that. And these can be voluntary efforts. So I think the pay gap legislation that requires companies of over 250 employees to report is a very positive one, and it will encourage transparency, and targets will encourage greater change.
Narissa, go on.
I disagree with that, actually, forcing companies to pay. I think that will actually perversely and badly affect women, because it will take away their bargaining power if they want something other than a pay rise. If they want a title change instead, companies will obviously have to feel like they have to make sure that the pay is increased in line with their male counterparts, but the women might actually not want that. So their bargaining power is actually massively reduced.
You don't think women in the job want a pay rise? Doesn't everybody want a pay rise?
Well, obviously, if that's what they want, then great. But women have the chance to choose, and they should have the power to say, actually, I'd like a title change, I'd like a promotion in that way, rather than a pay rise.
Maybe they'd like both. Narissa, I mean, do you not acknowledge that there are women out there working full-time, doing exactly the same job as men, who are getting paid less? I know them. Do you not know any?
Well, if you look at the statistics from the ONS last year, actually in February that came out, 0.8% of women between the ages of 22 to 29 were earning 0.8% more than men, more than their male counterparts.
0.8%, it's not much, is it?
Well, it's not much, but it's still a positive discrimination towards women. And between the ages of 30 to 39, women were getting paid 0.5% less than their male counterparts. So really, I don't think that there is a meaningful pay gap as we seem to be purporting.
Hello, everyone. Hey, I'm just stopping by to remind you that liberals are insane. Social justice warriors are becoming more violent and triggered than ever before. Anyways, be sure to subscribe to KGP TV on YouTube and have a blessed day. Yeah, man.